In a city where the sky always held the soft violet tint of twilight, Haru and Akari lived a life most only witnessed in romantic films. They were artists, souls bound by a shared, vibrant vision of the world. To see them together in their sun-drenched studio was to watch a masterpiece in progress. Haru, with his meticulous attention to detail, and Akari, whose brushstrokes were as free as the wind, complemented each other with poetic symmetry. Their friends joked that they shared a single heartbeat, so attuned were they to one another's silent thoughts. Every morning began under the ancient weeping cherry blossoms that lined the narrow path to their shared workspace. The pink petals fell like silent blessings upon their shoulders, making the world feel like a watercolor painting that would never, ever fade. They promised to one day paint a grand mural that would capture the essence of eternity, a testament to a love that felt untouchable by time. Their peak happiness arrived during a humid summer. The city glowed with paper lanterns and the pulse of festival drums. Amidst the heavy scent of street food and the crackle of fireworks, they stood at the shrine overlooking the sparkling cityscape. There, under a sky lit by gold and crimson, they made a solemn vow. They promised to be each other's light, a sanctuary against whatever darkness the world might throw their way. Akari gripped Haru's hand tightly that night, her eyes reflecting the fireworks with an intensity he would later recognize as desperation. At the time, it felt like a beautiful beginning, a final sealing of their intertwined fates. However, the transition to autumn brought a chilling change. The first fracture appeared as a low hum in the middle of a restless night, the vibration of Akari's phone. Haru watched as she slipped out of bed, her silhouette ghost-like in the moonlight, to answer a call in the hallway. Her voice was a hushed, frantic whisper, jagged with a tension he had never heard. When she returned, she claimed it was a wrong number, but the warmth in her eyes was replaced by a distant, glassy stare. In the studio, the comfortable silence became heavy and suffocating. Akari began hiding her phone, instinctively tilting the screen away whenever Haru walked by. She made frequent, hurried excuses to leave their painting sessions early. Haru's insecurity began to fester like an untreated wound. He wondered if he was no longer enough, if their eternal love was beginning to sour. One afternoon, while looking for a palette knife, his hand brushed against a thick, hidden envelope in Akari's bag. His heart hammered as he pulled it out. It wasn't a secret letter from a lover, but something far more clinical and terrifying. Official medical documents from a specialized neurosurgery facility, bearing a name he didn't recognize. Before he could read more, Akari entered the room, her once vibrant face draining of color. The confrontation was sharp and painful. Haru held the envelope out, his voice cracking as he demanded an explanation. Akari's face went deathly pale as she snatched the papers back. She offered a desperate, obvious lie about a distant relative's failing health, her eyes darting away from his search for truth. The foundation of his trust shattered completely. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Driven by fear and growing suspicion, Haru decided he could no longer wait for her to be honest. He followed her in secret one evening to a secluded, shadowy park at the edge of the district. His heart sank as he watched her approach a mysterious man waiting by a bench. They spoke in low, intimate tones, and as the man placed a gentle, comforting hand on her trembling shoulder, Haru turned away in the darkness, convinced that the woman he once called his home was already slipping into the arms of another, leaving their shared dreams to crumble into dust. Haru's world began to narrow until it was nothing more than a claustrophobic maze of doubt and shadowed corners. Every time Akari drifted into a pensive silence during their meals, he interpreted it as a sign of her fading affection, a mental tally of all the ways she was pulling away from their shared life. He became a stranger in his own home, watching her from the shadows of his own making, his eyes tracking her every movement with a cold, analytical hunger for proof of betrayal. He stayed up late into the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to her shallow, uneven breathing, wondering if she was dreaming of the man he had seen in the park. The intimacy they had once shared, that effortless dance of souls that made the world feel small and safe, had been replaced by a cautious, tiptoeing avoidance. He was drowning in a sea of his own assumptions, unable to see the shore because he refused to believe it still existed. This psychological erosion manifested vividly in their art, which had always been the mirror of their relationship. The studio, which had once been a cathedral of light and collaborative spirit, became a site of creative mourning. Where they had once painted with vibrant, life-affirming colors, Haru's side of the room now hosted canvases of oppressive gloom. He worked exclusively in shades of charcoal and cold, bruising indigos, capturing figures that were fractured, isolated, and weeping. Akari's own work had slowed to a crawl. She would sit for hours staring at a blank canvas, her brushes dry and forgotten in her lap. When she did try to paint, her hands trembled so violently that she would drop her tools, her eyes filling with a profound, quiet despair that Haru mistook for the exhaustion of living a double life. The tension eventually snapped during a rain-slicked Tuesday evening when the air in the apartment felt too heavy to breathe. Haru's voice, once used only for whispers of adoration, became a jagged blade. He accused her of infidelity, of throwing away their years for a stranger in a park, and of being a coward who couldn't even admit the truth to his face. Akari stood there, her body looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen, yet she remained stoically silent. She didn't offer a defense, a counter-accusation, or even a plea for understanding. She simply watched him with a tearful, hollow gaze that seemed to look right through his anger into something much darker. When she finally spoke, it was only to tell him she needed space to breathe. Within days, she moved her belongings out in small, quiet boxes, leaving the studio feeling like a haunted, empty shell. Left alone with his bitterness, Haru's obsession drove him to seek out the man he believed had stolen his future. He returned to the medical facility he had seen on the envelope, waiting in the pouring rain until he saw the figure emerge from the glass doors. But as he followed him, the reality of the situation began to shift in a way Haru hadn't prepared for. The man wasn't going to a secret romantic rendezvous. He was entering a prestigious university to deliver a keynote lecture on advanced neuro-oncology. A frantic search on Haru's phone confirmed the man's identity. He was one of the country's leading neurosurgeons. Paralyzing confusion washed over Haru as the image of the man's comforting hand on Akari's shoulder took on a devastatingly different meaning. It wasn't the touch of a secret lover, it was the gravity of a doctor delivering a death sentence. He raced back to the studio, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He tore through their old storage boxes until he found a small leather-bound journal tucked behind a stack of their early joyful sketches. The pages inside were a map of Akari's hidden heartbreak. She hadn't been leaving him for another man. She was pushing him away because she had been diagnosed with an aggressive terminal tumor that was stealing her motor functions and her time. She wrote about the agonizing decision to become the villain in his story so that he would hate her rather than mourn her. She wanted to spare him the slow, agonizing sight of her physical and mental decline, choosing to break his heart in an instant to save it from years of lingering pain. "I want him to remember my art," one entry read through a smudge of dried tears, "not my illness." The weight of his own cruelty crushed the remaining air from Haru's lungs. He had spent their final months together being her tormentor when she needed a sanctuary. Desperate to undo the damage, he sprinted toward her new apartment, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He rehearsed his apology with every step, a frantic prayer for one more chance to be the light she needed. But when he reached her door, it stood slightly ajar, revealing a room that was cold, stripped of life, and eerily quiet. Her phone was disconnected, her easel was gone, and the apartment was nothing but an empty void. Haru stood in the center of the silence, a terrifying realization dawning on him that in his blind pursuit of a lie, he had squandered the most precious thing of all, the time they had left. The silence of the empty apartment was a roar that propelled Haru back into the night air. He sprinted through the neon streets, his mind a frantic reel of their shared places. He went to their park, the bridge, the library, and the bakery they loved. The wind was cold. Every location was a hollow monument to a slipping life. Panic turned into a focused desperation. There was only one place left, a place far where the land met the sea, a spot that held the beginning of their story. The seaside cliff was bathed in purple light as the sun made its final descent away. Akari stood silhouetted against the vast ocean. Her coat fluttered in the wind, and she looked so fragile that Haru feared a gust might carry her away. When she turned and saw him, her mask finally shattered. Haru didn't wait for an explanation. He pulled her into an embrace so tight it felt as though he were trying to fuse their fractured souls. The truth exploded between them in a torrent of sobs. She confessed that she didn't want his last memories of her to be of sterile hospitals and failing strength. She wanted to remain the vibrant artist he loved, not a patient defined by a ticking clock. Haru held her face, his tears mixing with hers, as he told her that there was no version of her he wouldn't love. Losing their remaining time was the greatest pain of all. They returned to their studio, and the bitterness that had poisoned the air was replaced by a profound tenderness. They both knew the end was approaching, but instead of hiding from the shadow, they decided to paint within it. They shared one last sunset from the balcony. The final weeks were a montage of quiet beauty. Haru moved his bed next to hers, and they spent hours watching the light shift across the ceiling. Even as her motor functions began to fail, they found ways to create together. When her hands became too weak to hold a brush, Haru would place his hand over hers, guiding the bristles in a vivid dance of color. They focused on the beauty of the mundane, including the steam from a teacup, the moonlight in her hair, and the rhythm of their breathing in the dark. It was the most honest art they had ever produced, fueled only by the raw necessity of saying goodbye. One morning, as the first light of dawn arrived, Akari passed away peacefully in her sleep. She left behind one final unfinished painting, a landscape of the park where they had first met, but with a deliberate space left in the center. Haru understood her final request. He took up his brush one last time and completed the mural they had started years ago. The mural was their masterpiece. He painted himself standing beside her, their figures blurred into a single light that defied darkness. It was her final gift to him, a reminder that even though her physical form was gone, their connection was a masterpiece that could never be forgotten. He promised to never forget her. A year later, Haru stood under the cherry blossoms where they had once made their vows. Pink petals drifted down like silent snow, landing on his shoulders. He was alone, but the weight of his earlier grief had transformed into an enduring peace. He felt her presence in the wind. Her spirit was everywhere. He looked up at the sky, seeing the same violet tint they used to dream about. He realized then that Akari's secret hadn't been an act of cruelty, but her final tragic gift of love. She had tried to carry the burden alone to keep his world bright, and in her absence, he finally understood that a love doesn't have to be perfect or long-lived to be life-changing. He smiled, picked up his sketchbook, and began to draw, carrying her light into every single final stroke today.